After years of dedicating her life to caring for her sick husband, she unexpectedly came home and uncovered a disturbing secret that would change everything forever. The hidden truth that emerged revealed not only betrayal, but a sinister plan she could never have imagined. Lucy had always prided herself on being a devoted wife, caring for Richard with unwavering dedication for nearly a decade. Little did she know that beneath the surface of her seemingly noble sacrifices lay a web of betrayal. As she overheard that fateful conversation between Richard and their neighbor, her world shattered into pieces she never imagined she'd have to pick up. The shock of discovering her husband's infidelity hit her like a cold, relentless wave, leaving her gasping for air. It was more than just the betrayal of their marital vows. It was the deception that cut the deepest, the realization that the person she had trusted most in the world had been living a lie. In moments like these, the mind races to find answers, to piece together the fragmented clues that had been overlooked or dismissed. Lucy began to reflect on the subtle signs she had ignored. The late-night phone calls Richard claimed were from work, the sudden need for privacy, the mysterious receipts she had found crumpled in his pockets. These once insignificant details now formed a pattern, a puzzle that pointed to a truth she had been too trusting to see. It was as if a veil had been lifted, revealing a reality that had been hidden in plain sight all along. But Lucy wasn't one to sit idly by, drowning in her grief. Instead, she resolved to take control of the situation, to confront the reality of her marriage head-on. The discovery of infidelity, while devastating, also ignited a spark of determination within her. She knew she needed to gather more than just suspicion. She needed solid proof of Richard's betrayal. Armed with this new resolve, Lucy set out to uncover the full extent of Richard's deceit, to expose the truth that had been festering beneath the surface for far too long. In times of betrayal, the need for validation becomes overwhelming. Lucy's mind was plagued with questions. How long had this been going on? How deep did Richard's deception run? And perhaps most painfully, why had she been so blind to it? Yet, as she grappled with these questions, Lucy also recognized the importance of clarity. She needed to distinguish between the emotional turmoil she was experiencing and the concrete actions she needed to take to protect herself. This was not just about Richard's infidelity. It was about reclaiming her sense of self and ensuring that the lies would no longer define her life. As she began to dig deeper, Lucy realized that infidelity often comes with a trail of other secrets. Her instincts told her that Richard's betrayal might not end with an affair. She started to pay closer attention to his behavior, his finances, and even his health. The more she looked, the more inconsistencies she found. It was as if Richard had been living a double life, one that went far beyond the boundaries of their marriage. And with each new discovery, Lucy's resolve grew stronger. She was no longer just a victim of infidelity. She was on a mission to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. In the end, the discovery of Richard's infidelity marked not just the end of their marriage as Lucy knew it, but also the beginning of her journey towards the truth. It was a painful revelation, but one that empowered her to take the steps necessary to protect herself. As she gathered her evidence and steeled herself for the confrontation that was to come, Lucy knew that this was only the beginning. The betrayal had opened her eyes to a world of deception she had never imagined, and she was determined to uncover every last secret, no matter where it led. Richard's charade was as twisted as it was elaborate. For 9 long years, he had carefully crafted an image of vulnerability, feigning the debilitating symptoms of Parkinson's disease. Lucy, with her compassionate heart and medical expertise, had never once questioned the authenticity of his condition. She had assumed the role of caregiver with grace, unaware that Richard was manipulating her goodwill for his own selfish gain. His limp, the tremors, the supposed difficulty in performing basic tasks. Each was a carefully rehearsed act designed to exploit her trust and devotion. It's astonishing, isn't it, how easily we can be led to believe in a reality that doesn't exist, especially when it comes from someone we love. Richard knew this well. He capitalized on Lucy's trust, using his fake illness as a shield, not just to garner sympathy, but to gain control over their lives. The medications she diligently administered, the appointments she meticulously scheduled, all of it was part of his plan. In truth, Richard was as fit as ever, his condition nothing more than a lie to keep Lucy bound to him, physically and emotionally, under the guise of care. As time passed, Lucy began to notice subtle discrepancies that didn't align with Richard's supposed illness. His hands, which would shake uncontrollably at times, seemed unusually steady when he thought no one was watching. There were moments when he moved with an agility that someone in his condition shouldn't possess. These small inconsistencies, though easy to dismiss individually, started to form a bigger picture in Lucy's mind. The more she observed, the more the cracks in Richard's facade began to show. It wasn't long before suspicion crept into her thoughts, nagging at her every time she interacted with him. What Richard underestimated was Lucy's sharp intuition. She had spent years studying medical conditions, understanding the intricate ways they affect the human body. Once her suspicion was aroused, it wasn't difficult for her to start connecting the dots. Richard's symptoms didn't match the progression of Parkinson's disease as she knew it. The medications he claimed to need didn't correspond with the standard treatment protocol. Her training as a nurse, coupled with her growing mistrust, pushed her to delve deeper into his condition, seeking the truth behind the lies. Lucy's investigation into Richard's illness led her down a path she never expected to tread. She began researching Parkinson's disease with renewed intensity, consulting medical journals, and reaching out to colleagues for insights. What she discovered only confirmed her worst fears. Richard's supposed illness was nothing more than a fabrication. The realization hit her hard, but it also fueled her determination. She knew she had to confront Richard, but not before she had gathered irrefutable evidence of his deception. After all, exposing the truth required more than just suspicion. It demanded proof that could stand up to scrutiny. The medical deception that Richard had perpetrated was more than just a betrayal of trust. It was a violation of the very principles Lucy held dear as a caregiver. As she prepared to confront him, Lucy knew that this was only the beginning. The lies he had spun about his health were intertwined with other deceptions, each one unraveling as she pulled at the threads. And as she braced herself for the inevitable confrontation, Lucy realized that the battle she was about to face was not just about exposing Richard's fraud, but about reclaiming her own integrity in the process. Lucy's suspicions were like seeds that quickly took root, growing into an unshakable determination to uncover the full extent of Richard's deceit. She began with the most obvious signs, the medications he claimed to need. Each prescription bottle became a clue, each dosage a piece of the puzzle. Lucy scrutinized the labels, cross-referenced the drugs with medical resources, and even went so far as to consult with a trusted colleague, all in a bid to validate the authenticity of Richard's supposed treatment plan. It wasn't long before she discovered glaring inconsistencies that could no longer be ignored. As Lucy delved deeper, she noticed more than just discrepancies in medication. Richard's financial habits, once something she had trusted him with completely, began to raise red flags. Bills that didn't add up, withdrawals that had no clear explanation, and unexplained expenses that seemed to benefit no one but Richard himself. These weren't the actions of a man struggling with a debilitating illness. They were the actions of someone who had something to hide. The closer she looked, the more she found, each revelation more damning than the last. In this pursuit of truth, Lucy found herself becoming something of a detective. She began to shadow Richard subtly, taking note of his movements, his routines, and the way he interacted with others when he thought she wasn't watching. It was a painful process, forcing her to confront the possibility that the man she had loved and cared for was living a lie. But it was also empowering. Each discovery, each piece of evidence she gathered, strengthened her resolve to see this through. She was no longer just a wife tending to her husband. She was an investigator, seeking justice for the betrayal she had endured. One day, Lucy decided to follow Richard when he left the house under the pretense of visiting the doctor. What she uncovered shattered the last remnants of doubt she had clung to. Richard, the man who could barely stand without assistance in her presence, walked briskly down the street, heading not to a clinic, but to a bar. He moved with the ease of a man half his age, laughing and conversing with acquaintances as if he hadn't a care in the world. Lucy's heart ached as she captured photos of him, each click of the camera a confirmation of the truth she had feared to face. With each passing day, Lucy's investigation revealed more about Richard's deception than she had ever imagined. It wasn't just the infidelity or the lies about his health, it was the entire facade he had built around their lives. The more she uncovered, the more she realized how deeply rooted his deception had become. This was no simple case of betrayal. It was a calculated manipulation designed to control every aspect of her life. And yet, Lucy refused to let it break her. Instead, she used it as fuel, determined to expose Richard for who he truly was. In the end, Lucy's investigative actions weren't just about uncovering the truth. They were about reclaiming her power. The more she learned, the more she understood that this wasn't just about Richard's betrayal. It was about her right to know the truth, to protect herself, and to hold him accountable for the pain he had caused. And with each new piece of evidence she gathered, Lucy knew she was one step closer to confronting Richard and bringing his web of lies crashing down. With her suspicions confirmed and her resolve steeled, Lucy knew that the time had come to gather undeniable proof of Richard's betrayal. The photos she had taken of him walking unaided, laughing and socializing at the bar were just the beginning. She needed more, something that would leave no room for denial, something that could stand up in a courtroom if necessary. So she turned her attention to documenting every detail of Richard's double life, ensuring that she had a complete and irrefutable picture of his deceit. Lucy's approach was methodical, almost clinical. She began by compiling a timeline of Richard's actions, meticulously noting every inconsistency, every suspicious move he made. Each time he claimed to be at the doctor's office, she would verify his whereabouts, often discovering that he was elsewhere entirely. The financial records she had once glanced over without a second thought were now scrutinized with a fine-tooth comb. Every unexplained transaction, every dubious withdrawal was catalogued and cross-referenced with the times Richard was supposedly too ill to even leave the house. But it wasn't just the tangible evidence that Lucy sought, it was the emotional truth as well. She kept a journal, detailing her thoughts and feelings as she uncovered more of Richard's lies. This wasn't just a record of betrayal, it was a testament to the emotional toll it had taken on her. The journal became her confidant, a place where she could pour out her grief, her anger, and her determination. It was a way to process the enormity of what she was discovering and to remind herself that she wasn't losing her mind. Richard's deception was real, and it was deep. One of the most damning pieces of evidence Lucy gathered came from Richard's own words. She began to secretly record their conversations, capturing the subtle ways he continued to manipulate her, even as his lies began to unravel. In one particularly telling moment, Richard let slip a comment about meeting a friend, someone Lucy knew he had never mentioned before. It was a small detail, but in the context of everything else, it was yet another thread in the web of deceit he had woven around their lives. These recordings, combined with the photographic evidence and financial records, formed a comprehensive dossier that Lucy knew would be impossible for Richard to refute. As the evidence piled up, so did Lucy's determination to see justice done. She knew that this was more than just a personal betrayal. It was a violation of trust that demanded consequences. The proof she had gathered wasn't just for her own peace of mind. It was to hold Richard accountable, to make him face the reality of what he had done. And with each new piece of evidence, Lucy felt a growing sense of empowerment. She was no longer a victim. She was taking control of her life, one discovery at a time. In the quiet moments when the weight of her discoveries threatened to overwhelm her, Lucy would remind herself of why she was doing this. It wasn't just about exposing Richard's lies. It was about reclaiming her life, her dignity, and her future. The proof of betrayal she had gathered was more than just evidence. It was a declaration that she would not be defined by his lies. And as she prepared to confront Richard with the full extent of what she had uncovered, Lucy knew that this was only the beginning. The truth was out there, and it was only a matter of time before Richard would have to face it. The day of reckoning was fast approaching, and Lucy knew it was time to bring Richard's deception to light in a way that would have lasting consequences. Armed with the irrefutable evidence she had painstakingly gathered, Lucy took the first step in seeking justice. She consulted with a lawyer. This was no ordinary legal consultation. It was a strategic meeting where Lucy laid out the full extent of Richard's fraud, from the false claims of illness to the financial mismanagement that had drained their savings. The lawyer, seasoned in cases of fraud and deception, was astounded by the depth of Richard's deceit and assured Lucy that she had a strong case. As they prepared to move forward with legal action, Lucy was briefed on the potential outcomes. Richard would not only face fraud charges, but also the possibility of losing everything he had manipulated Lucy into providing. The trust he had shattered could not be mended, and the law would ensure he paid the price for his betrayal. Lucy's lawyer explained the various legal avenues they could pursue, including criminal charges for fraud and civil action, to recover the financial losses Richard had caused. Each step was calculated, ensuring that Richard would be held fully accountable for his actions. The legal process began with a formal demand letter outlining the charges against Richard and the evidence that would be presented in court. This was no empty threat. It was a carefully constructed document designed to compel Richard to face the reality of his situation. As Lucy watched the letter being delivered, she felt a mix of emotions: relief that justice was finally within reach, and sadness that it had come to this. The man she had once loved was now someone she barely recognized, someone who would soon stand before a judge to answer for his lies. Richard's response was predictably defiant. He attempted to downplay the severity of his actions, claiming that his lies were harmless and that Lucy was overreacting. But the evidence was undeniable, and as the legal wheels began to turn, Richard found himself backed into a corner. His bravado faded as the reality of the situation set in. He was about to face serious legal repercussions that could change his life forever. The legal consequences of his actions were no longer a distant possibility. They were imminent, and there was no escape. As the case moved forward, Lucy's resolve never wavered. She attended every meeting, reviewed every document, and made sure that nothing was overlooked. This wasn't just about punishing Richard. It was about reclaiming her life and ensuring that justice was served. The legal battle was grueling, but Lucy was prepared for it. With each passing day, she grew more confident that the law would hold Richard accountable, that he would finally face the consequences of his betrayal. And as the court date approached, Lucy knew that this was her moment, not just to see Richard brought to justice, but to close this painful chapter of her life and begin anew. In the end, the legal consequences were inevitable. Richard, once so confident in his ability to deceive, was left with no choice but to face the charges against him. Fraud, deception, financial mismanagement, all of it laid bare for the court to see. And as Lucy stood in that courtroom, watching Richard as the verdict was read, she knew that this was not just an end, but a beginning. The justice she sought was not just for the lies he had told, but for the life he had tried to steal from her. And now, with the legal consequences in place, Lucy could finally start to rebuild, free from the shadow of Richard's betrayal. As the legal case against Richard gathered momentum, Lucy found herself diving deeper into the details of his supposed illness. It wasn't enough to expose his deceit. She needed to understand how he had managed to maintain the illusion for so long. Her background in nursing gave her the tools she needed to dissect the medical aspects of Richard's deception. She began by investigating the medications he had claimed to be taking, each one a piece of the puzzle that, when scrutinized, revealed just how far Richard had gone to fabricate his condition. Lucy's research was meticulous. She pored over medical textbooks, consulted with colleagues, and even reached out to specialists who could provide insights into Parkinson's disease and its treatment. What she found was shocking. The medications Richard had been prescribed were either entirely inappropriate for his supposed condition or were administered in doses that made no medical sense. It became clear that Richard had not only lied about his illness, but had manipulated the medical system to support his false narrative. The deeper Lucy dug, the more she realized that Richard's deception was not just a betrayal of her trust, but a gross abuse of medical resources. Armed with this new information, Lucy expanded her investigation. She reviewed Richard's medical records, cross-referencing them with the prescriptions and treatments he had received over the years. It was a painstaking process, but one that yielded undeniable proof of Richard's fraud. The records were riddled with inconsistencies, from falsified symptoms to exaggerated reports of his condition. Even the doctors who had treated him were duped, relying on Richard's fabricated symptoms to prescribe treatments that were unnecessary at best and harmful at worst. But Lucy didn't stop there. She reached out to a few trusted colleagues, sharing her findings and asking for their professional opinions. The consensus was clear. Richard's case was a textbook example of medical deception, where a patient had successfully manipulated the system to his advantage. This wasn't just a case of lying to his wife. Richard had defrauded the medical community, taking advantage of the trust and expertise of doctors and nurses who had genuinely tried to help him. For Lucy, this realization was both infuriating and heartbreaking. She had dedicated her life to caring for others, and now the man she had cared for had used that very system to deceive her. The implications of Richard's medical deception were profound. Lucy knew that this information would be crucial in the legal case against him. It wasn't just about the emotional and financial betrayal anymore. It was about holding Richard accountable for the harm he had caused on a much larger scale. By manipulating the medical system, he had not only hurt Lucy, but also undermined the integrity of the healthcare profession, a profession Lucy held in the highest regard. As Lucy compiled her findings, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of responsibility. She had uncovered something far bigger than her own personal betrayal, a web of lies that had ensnared not just her, but the very system she had dedicated her life to. And as she prepared to present this new evidence, Lucy knew that the road ahead would be challenging. But she also knew that she had the truth on her side, and with it, the power to bring Richard's deception to light, once and for all. As Lucy dug deeper into Richard's deception, the financial aspect of his betrayal came into sharper focus. She had always trusted Richard with their finances, believing him to be a responsible and honest partner. But now, as she reviewed their financial records with a critical eye, the truth began to unfold. Large sums of money had inexplicably disappeared from their accounts over the years, money that Lucy had assumed was being used to cover medical expenses or household needs. Instead, it became clear that Richard had been funneling these funds into his own secretive ventures and personal pleasures. Lucy's heart sank as she traced the money trail, each discovery more disheartening than the last. The withdrawals were frequent, often timed to coincide with the periods when Richard claimed to need expensive treatments or specialist care. But instead of paying for medical expenses, Richard had been using the money to fund a lifestyle that he kept hidden from Lucy. Luxurious dinners, expensive gifts, and even trips that Lucy had never known about were all part of the financial mismanagement that Richard had orchestrated behind her back. The more Lucy uncovered, the more the extent of Richard's financial betrayal became apparent. He had not only lied about his health, but he had also drained their savings, leaving Lucy with far less than she had assumed they had. It was a double betrayal, first the emotional deceit, and now the financial one. Lucy felt a wave of anger and sadness as she realized how much of their shared life had been built on lies. The money that she had worked so hard to save, that she had entrusted to Richard for their future, had been squandered on his selfish whims. As Lucy delved further into the financial records, she began to notice patterns in Richard's spending. He had been careful, but not careful enough. The expenses were spread out, often under different accounts or names, but they all pointed back to Richard. The evidence was damning. He had taken advantage of Lucy's trust, using their joint assets to live a life of indulgence while she worked tirelessly to care for him. It was a stark reminder of just how deeply Richard's deception ran, affecting every aspect of their life together. But Lucy was not one to back down in the face of betrayal. Armed with this new knowledge, she sought the help of a financial advisor, someone who could help her make sense of the full extent of the damage. Together, they pieced together the financial puzzle, identifying every last cent that Richard had misappropriated. It was a painstaking process, but one that Lucy was determined to see through. She knew that this evidence would be crucial in holding Richard accountable, both legally and personally. In the end, the financial mismanagement was not just about the money. It was about the trust that Richard had shattered. Lucy had always believed in the strength of their partnership, in the shared goals and dreams they had for the future. But now those dreams had been tainted by Richard's greed and deceit. As Lucy prepared to confront him with the evidence, she knew that this was more than just a financial reckoning. It was a moment of truth that would define the rest of her life. And with each new piece of evidence she uncovered, Lucy felt more determined than ever to see justice served. With each new revelation about Richard's deception, Lucy realized that she needed to take her investigation to the next level. The evidence she had gathered so far was substantial, but she knew that in order to truly expose Richard, she had to catch him in the act. So she devised a plan that would allow her to observe Richard's actions without his knowledge. It was a bold move, but Lucy was determined to see it through. She began by pretending to maintain her usual routine, leaving the house for work as she always did. But instead of heading to her job, she circled back, keeping a close watch on Richard's movements from a discreet distance. The first day of surveillance was both nerve-wracking and eye-opening. Lucy parked her car a few blocks away from their home and watched as Richard, believing he was alone, moved with a freedom she hadn't seen in years. He didn't exhibit any signs of the supposed illness that had bound him to the house for so long. Instead, he walked briskly down the street, heading to places Lucy had never known him to frequent. Each step he took further confirmed what she had already suspected. Richard had been living a double life, one that she was now determined to uncover in its entirety. As the days went by, Lucy became more adept at her undercover surveillance. She followed Richard to various locations, each time documenting his actions with meticulous care. She snapped photos, took notes, and even recorded video footage when she could do so without being noticed. What she captured was a shocking contrast to the man she had known, or thought she had known. Richard was living as if he didn't have a care in the world, frequenting bars, meeting with people Lucy had never seen before, and even engaging in activities that were far from the image of a sick man. Every piece of evidence Lucy gathered was another nail in the coffin of Richard's fabricated life. The more Lucy observed, the more she realized the extent of Richard's deception. He had not just lied about his illness, he had created an entire persona that was the opposite of who he truly was. The man who had claimed to be too weak to leave the house was now walking, talking and living with an energy that belied his supposed condition. And as Lucy documented each of these moments, she felt a mix of emotions, anger, betrayal, but also a growing sense of empowerment. She was no longer the passive victim of Richard's lies. She was taking control, one discovery at a time. Lucy's undercover work was not without its risks. There were moments when she feared being caught, when Richard's eyes seemed to scan the crowd a little too closely, or when he hesitated before entering a building as if sensing something was amiss. But Lucy remained undeterred. She knew that the evidence she was gathering was too important to abandon. Each day brought her closer to the truth, closer to the moment when she could confront Richard with the undeniable proof of his deceit. And with each successful surveillance, Lucy's confidence grew. She was no longer the naive wife who had been deceived. She was a force to be reckoned with, determined to expose the truth, no matter the cost. As Lucy compiled the evidence from her surveillance, she knew that the time to confront Richard was drawing near. The photos, videos, and notes she had gathered formed a comprehensive picture of his double life, one that he could no longer deny. But Lucy also knew that this was just the beginning. The surveillance had given her the proof she needed, but it had also opened her eyes to the full extent of Richard's betrayal. And as she prepared to take the next step, Lucy was more determined than ever to see justice served, not just for herself, but for everyone Richard had deceived. As the weight of her discoveries pressed down on her, Lucy found herself struggling to keep her emotions in check. The realization that her entire life with Richard had been built on lies was overwhelming. Every moment they had shared, Every sacrifice she had made now seemed tainted by his betrayal. The emotional toll was immense, and despite her best efforts to remain strong, there were moments when the pain became too much to bear. It was during these times that Lucy turned to Mary, her neighbor and confidant, for support. Mary had always been there for Lucy, a steady presence in her life. But now, as Lucy's world crumbled around her, Mary became her anchor. She listened as Lucy poured out her heart, sharing the details of Richard's deception and the emotional collapse that had followed. Mary's support was unwavering, offering not just a sympathetic ear, but practical advice on how to cope with the situation. She reminded Lucy that it was okay to feel devastated, that it was a natural response to the kind of betrayal she had endured. With Mary's help, Lucy began to navigate the complex emotions that were threatening to overwhelm her. But even with Mary's support, there were moments when Lucy felt completely lost. The emotional collapse wasn't just about the pain of Richard's betrayal, it was about the shattering of her identity. She had spent years caring for a man who had deceived her at every turn, and now she was left to pick up the pieces of a life that no longer made sense. The trust she had placed in Richard, the love she had given him, all seemed like a cruel joke. And as the reality of her situation sank in, Lucy found herself questioning everything, her choices, her instincts, even her sense of self. The grief Lucy experienced was compounded by the sense of isolation that often accompanies such profound betrayal. Despite Mary's support, there were times when Lucy felt completely alone, trapped in a whirlwind of emotions that she couldn't escape. The anger, the sadness, the disbelief, they all came crashing down on her, leaving her emotionally exhausted. It was during these darkest moments that Lucy realized the importance of self-care. She began to take small steps to regain control over her life, focusing on activities that brought her peace, even if only for a moment. Whether it was going for a walk, reading a book, or simply sitting in silence, these moments of self-care became her refuge. As Lucy worked through her emotional collapse, she also began to see glimmers of hope. The pain was still there, but so was the determination to move forward. Mary's encouragement played a crucial role in this. She reminded Lucy that while Richard's betrayal had been devastating, it didn't have to define her future. Lucy began to focus on the things she could control, setting small goals for herself each day. Whether it was organizing her thoughts, planning her next steps, or simply getting through the day, these goals gave her a sense of purpose, a way to move beyond the pain and start rebuilding her life. In the end, Lucy's emotional collapse was not the end of her story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter. It was a painful process, but one that ultimately led her to a place of strength and resilience. With Mary's support and her own inner resolve, Lucy began to emerge from the darkness, ready to face the future with a renewed sense of purpose. And as she looked ahead, she knew that while the road to recovery would be long, she was no longer alone. She had the support she needed, the strength she had discovered within herself, and the determination to rebuild her life on her own terms. With the emotional storm beginning to settle, Lucy turned her attention to the next daunting task, pursuing legal action against Richard. The evidence she had painstakingly gathered, the photographs, financial records, and medical research, was now assembled into a compelling case. With Mary by her side, Lucy met with her lawyer to map out the legal strategy that would bring Richard to justice. The decision to press charges wasn't taken lightly. Lucy knew that this would be a long and grueling process, but it was a necessary step to reclaim her life and hold Richard accountable for his deceit. The first step in the legal proceedings was to file a formal complaint detailing the charges against Richard. Fraud, deception, financial mismanagement. Each charge was backed by the mountain of evidence Lucy had compiled. Her lawyer assured her that the case was strong, that Richard's actions would not go unpunished. But even with this assurance, Lucy couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The courtroom, with its cold formality and rigid procedures, was a world she had never imagined herself entering. Yet, here she was, preparing to face the man who had betrayed her, not just as a wife, but as a person. As the case progressed, The legal team worked tirelessly to prepare for the trial. Lucy found herself immersed in the process, reviewing documents, answering questions, and reliving the painful memories that had led to this point. It was emotionally taxing but also empowering. Each day brought her closer to the moment when Richard would be held accountable in front of the law. The court hearings, the depositions, and the cross-examinations all became part of Lucy's journey towards justice. She was no longer just a passive participant. She was actively shaping the outcome of her case. Richard's defense was as deceptive as his actions. He tried to paint himself as a victim, downplaying the severity of his deceit and shifting the blame onto others. But the evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. Lucy's lawyer expertly dismantled Richard's arguments piece by piece, revealing the truth behind the lies. Witnesses were called, including medical professionals who testified to the fraudulent nature of Richard's claims. Each testimony further solidified the case against him, leaving little doubt about his guilt. The legal proceedings were a battle of wills, but Lucy stood firm, her resolve unshaken by Richard's attempts to evade responsibility. As the trial drew to a close, Lucy felt a mixture of emotions. There was relief that the end was in sight, but also a sense of sadness for what had been lost. The courtroom, once a place of fear and uncertainty, had become the stage where Lucy reclaimed her voice. The verdict was delivered in a quiet, solemn moment, with the judge pronouncing Richard guilty of all charges. The sentence was severe, reflecting the gravity of his actions. For Lucy, it was a moment of closure, but not the final chapter. The legal proceedings had given her justice, but they also marked the beginning of her journey towards healing and rebuilding her life. In the aftermath of the trial, Lucy took a moment to reflect on everything she had been through. The legal battle had been exhausting, both emotionally and physically, but it had also been necessary. It was a reminder that justice, while difficult to achieve, was possible. The courtroom had seen the end of Richard's lies, but for Lucy it was the start of something new. She had faced her fears, confronted the man who had betrayed her, and emerged on the other side stronger than before. And as she left the courthouse, Lucy knew that she was ready to start the next chapter of her life, free from the shadows of the past. The verdict was a pivotal moment in the courtroom, but it was just the beginning of Richard's downfall. As the gavel struck, the reality of his situation finally began to sink in. Richard, who had spent years constructing a web of lies, now faced the full weight of the legal system. His once confident demeanor crumbled as the judge handed down the sentence: a significant prison term for fraud, deception, and financial mismanagement. The man who had deceived so many was now stripped of his freedom, forced to confront the consequences of his actions behind bars. In prison, Richard was no longer the master manipulator he had once been. The environment was harsh, and the reality of his new life was a stark contrast to the comfortable existence he had enjoyed while living off Lucy's trust and hard work. The other inmates had no sympathy for his plight. They saw through his attempts to garner pity, just as Lucy eventually had. Richard's health, once feigned as a means of manipulation, genuinely began to deteriorate under the stress of incarceration. The irony was not lost on him. His lies about illness had finally manifested in a setting where no one cared. Outside the prison walls, the ripple effects of Richard's downfall were felt in the community. Friends and neighbors, once charmed by his seemingly affable nature, now viewed him with disdain. The man who had once been respected for his wit and charisma was now a pariah, his name synonymous with betrayal and fraud. Lucy, on the other hand, became a symbol of resilience. Her story spread, inspiring others who had suffered similar betrayals to seek justice and stand up for themselves. Richard's downfall wasn't just his own. It was a cautionary tale for anyone who thought they could deceive those who trusted them. Lucy, though relieved that justice had been served, was not untouched by the emotional fallout of Richard's downfall. There were moments when she felt a pang of sadness for the man she had once loved, now reduced to a shell of his former self. But these feelings were fleeting, quickly replaced by the realization that Richard's punishment was a necessary consequence of his actions. The man she had loved was gone long before the verdict was read, replaced by a manipulator who had no regard for the damage he caused. Richard's downfall was his own doing, and Lucy found solace in knowing that she had done everything in her power to expose the truth. As Richard settled into his new life in prison, he had plenty of time to reflect on the choices he had made. The luxury of deception was no longer available to him. The truth was all he had left, and it was a bitter pill to swallow. The friends who had once stood by him had vanished, unwilling to be associated with his crimes. His reputation, meticulously built over the years, was shattered beyond repair. Richard's downfall was complete, leaving him to face the reality of his actions alone. And in those quiet moments, he was haunted by the knowledge that he had brought this upon himself. For Lucy, Richard's downfall marked the end of a long and painful chapter in her life. It was a victory, not just in the legal sense, but in the personal sense as well. She had fought for her dignity, her financial stability, and her emotional well-being, and she had won. The shadows of Richard's lies no longer hung over her. They had been banished by the light of truth and justice. And as she moved forward, Lucy knew that while Richard's downfall was significant, it was her own rise from the ashes of betrayal that truly defined her journey. With Richard's downfall now a closed chapter, Lucy found herself standing at the threshold of a new beginning. The journey had been long and arduous, but it had also forged within her a resilience she never knew she possessed. The shadows of the past no longer held power over her. Instead, they served as a reminder of her strength, of the battles she had fought and won. Lucy was ready to move forward, to rebuild her life with a newfound sense of purpose and clarity. And in this new chapter, she wasn't alone. Her friendship with Mary had become a source of unwavering support and inspiration. Mary, who had stood by Lucy throughout the entire ordeal, was more than just a neighbor now. She was a true friend, someone who had shared in Lucy's pain and triumphs. Together they began to explore the possibilities that lay ahead, from small everyday joys to larger dreams that had once seemed out of reach. Whether it was a spontaneous trip to a new city or simply enjoying a quiet evening together, Lucy and Mary found strength in their friendship. It was a bond that had been tested by adversity and emerged stronger than ever, a testament to the power of connection in the face of betrayal. As Lucy began to rebuild her life, she discovered that the lessons she had learned were invaluable. Trust, once shattered, was not easily rebuilt, but Lucy knew that it was possible with time and patience. She approached her new beginnings with caution, but also with optimism, recognizing that the future was hers to shape. The financial stability she had fought to regain was now being carefully managed, with Lucy taking a more active role in her finances than ever before. She sought advice from experts, made informed decisions, and slowly began to regain her confidence in handling her own affairs. It was empowering, and it reminded her that she was capable of much more than she had ever given herself credit for. The emotional scars left by Richard's betrayal would take time to heal, but Lucy was committed to the process. She sought out counseling, not just to address the pain, but to understand how to move forward in a healthy way. It was through this process that Lucy began to rediscover her own identity, separate from the roles she had played in the past. She was no longer just Richard's wife or a victim of his lies. She was Lucy, a woman who had faced unimaginable challenges and come out the other side stronger and wiser. This journey of self-discovery was perhaps the most rewarding part of her new beginning. In the quiet moments, when Lucy reflected on everything she had been through, she realized that her story was far from over. The new beginnings she was embracing were not just about moving on from the past, but about creating a future that was truly her own. She began to explore new interests, rekindling passions that had been forgotten during the years of caring for Richard. Whether it was taking up a new hobby, learning a new skill, or simply spending time in nature, Lucy approached each day with a sense of possibility. The world, which had once seemed so small and confined, now felt full of opportunities waiting to be seized. As Lucy and Mary sat together one evening, watching the sun set on the horizon, they talked about the future, about dreams and plans that were finally within reach. There was no rush, no pressure to achieve everything at once. Instead, they took comfort in the knowledge that they had each other, and that whatever the future held, they would face it together. For Lucy, this was the essence of her new beginning, a life built on trust, friendship, and the hard-won knowledge that she was capable of overcoming even the greatest of challenges. And as the stars began to twinkle in the evening sky, Lucy felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years, confident that her new beginning was exactly where she was meant to be. As we reach the end of this journey, it's clear that Lucy's story is more than just a tale of betrayal and justice. It's a powerful reminder of the resilience that lies within each of us. Life will inevitably throw challenges our way, and sometimes those challenges come from the people we trust the most. But like Lucy, we all have the strength to face those challenges head-on, to uncover the truth, and to rebuild our lives on our own terms. Now, it's your turn. Think about the challenges you're facing or the situations in your life that might need a closer look. Are there areas where you've been too trusting, where you need to take back control? It's easy to fall into the trap of complacency, but remember, you have the power to change your circumstances. Start by asking the hard questions, seeking the truth, and surrounding yourself with people who genuinely support you. And don't stop there. Use the lessons from Lucy's story to fuel your own journey. Whether it's taking charge of your finances, standing up for yourself in difficult situations, or simply learning to trust your instincts, each step you take brings you closer to a life that's truly yours. Don't be afraid to make bold moves, to demand the respect and honesty you deserve, and to create the future you've always wanted. I encourage you to share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. What challenges have you faced and how did you overcome them? Your story could be the inspiration someone else needs to take that first step towards their own new beginning. And if you found value in Lucy's journey, be sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can continue to learn and grow with us. Remember, every ending is just the beginning of something new. Embrace the lessons, take action, and step confidently into your next chapter.